On the Ides of the 4th of March 4 BC, the heart of Rome pulsed with tension as Julius Caesar, the most powerful man in the ancient world, strode confidently into the Senate chamber, unaware that the shadows around him concealed daggers poised to strike. The air was thick with the weight of whispered conspiracies, the scent of incense mingling with the metallic tang of impending bloodshed. In a matter of moments, the man who had reshaped an empire would lie lifeless on the cold marble floor, his blood staining the very foundation of Roman power. This was no random act of violence. It was a meticulously planned assassination, born from fear, envy, and a desperate bid to save a republic on the brink of collapse. How did it come to this? And why did the hands of trusted allies turn against one of history's greatest leaders? To understand the assassination of Julius Caesar, we must first step back into the turbulent world of the late Roman Republic, a time when Rome was both a beacon of civilization and a cauldron of chaos. By the mid-1st century BC, Rome had grown from a modest city-state into a sprawling empire, its territories stretching from the Atlantic shores of Iberia to the deserts of North Africa and the eastern reaches of Greece. But with expansion came instability. The Republic, once a system of checks and balances governed by elected magistrates in the Senate, was crumbling under the weight of corruption, inequality, and endless power struggles. The traditional structures of governance, designed for a smaller, more cohesive society, could no longer contain the ambitions of men who sought to dominate an empire. At the heart of this turmoil stood Julius Caesar, a man whose name would become synonymous with both genius and tyranny. Born in 102 BC, though some sources suggest 100 BC, into the patrician Julii family, Caesar was not initially destined for greatness. His family, while noble, was neither particularly wealthy nor influential. Yet, through sheer determination, military prowess, and political cunning, he rose to become one of the most formidable figures in Roman history. As a young man, he navigated the dangerous waters of Roman politics during the civil wars between Sulla and Marius, narrowly escaping death when Sulla, the dictator at the time, targeted him for his connections to Marius, Caesar's uncle by marriage. This early brush with mortality seemed to forge in Caesar an unyielding resolve to seize power and secure his legacy. By the time he reached his 40s, Caesar had already made a name for himself as a military commander and a populist politician. His conquest of Gaul, modern-day France, and Belgium between 58 and 50 BC was a masterstroke of strategy and brutality, expanding Rome's borders and amassing him immense wealth and a fiercely loyal army. The Gallic Wars, chronicled in his own writings, the Commentarii de Bello Gallico, not only brought glory to Rome but also to Caesar himself, who used his victories to fuel his political ambitions. Back in Rome, however, his growing power alarmed the Senate, particularly the conservative faction known as the Optimates, who valued the old republican traditions and feared any man who might rise above the collective authority of the state. Caesar's rise was not without rivals. Among the most prominent was Pompey the Great, a celebrated general who had once been Caesar's ally and son-in-law through the marriage of Caesar's daughter Julia. Together with Marcus Licinius Crassus, a wealthy magnate, they formed the First Triumvirate, an informal alliance to dominate Roman politics. But Crassus's death in 53 BC, during a disastrous campaign in Parthia and the subsequent breakdown of ties with Pompey, set the stage for a bitter rivalry. By 49 BC, the Senate, under Pompey's influence, ordered Caesar to disband his army and return to Rome as a private citizen, an order tantamount to political suicide, as it would leave him vulnerable to prosecution by his enemies. Caesar, ever the gambler, refused. In a defining moment of defiance, he crossed the Rubicon River with his legions, an act of treason that sparked a civil war against Pompey and the Senate. The civil war that followed was a brutal contest for supremacy. Caesar's forces clashed with Pompey's across the Mediterranean, from Italy to Greece to Egypt. In 48 BC, at the Battle of Pharsalus in Greece, Caesar decisively defeated Pompey, who fled to Egypt only to be murdered by agents of the young pharaoh Ptolemy XIII. Caesar, arriving in Egypt shortly after, became entangled in the local power struggle, famously aligning himself with Cleopatra VII, Ptolemy's sister and rival. Their alliance, both political and personal, produced a son, Caesarion, and further cemented Caesar's image as a man of boundless ambition. By 45 BC, after further victories against Pompey's remaining allies, Caesar returned to Rome as the undisputed master of the empire. Yet, victory did not bring peace. Caesar's consolidation of power marked by his appointment as dictator perpetuo, or dictator for life, in early 44 BC sent shockwaves through the Roman elite. He reformed the courts, expanded citizenship, restructured the calendar, introducing the Julian calendar we still use as a basis today, and packed the Senate with loyalists. To many, especially the old Republican Guard, this was not reform but tyranny. Men like Marcus Junius Brutus, a respected senator and once a beneficiary of Caesar's clemency, and Gaius Cassius Longinus, a seasoned general who harbored deep resentment, began to see Caesar not as a savior but as a threat to the very soul of Rome. Whispers of conspiracy grew louder in the shadows of the Forum, as senators and former allies alike questioned how far Caesar's ambitions would go. Would he declare himself king, a title abhorrent to Romans who prided themselves on having expelled their last monarch centuries before? Or would he dismantle the republic entirely, replacing it with a dynasty of his own making? As the Ides of March approached, the city of Rome simmered with unease. Caesar, perhaps blinded by his own success or trusting in the loyalty of those around him, seemed oblivious to the danger. He had enemies, yes, but he had pardoned many of them, including Brutus, whom he treated almost as a son. He had survived wars, betrayals, and political machinations. Surely, he believed, he could survive whatever petty jealousies lingered in the Senate. But history, as it so often does, had other plans. The stage was set for a betrayal that would not only end a life but alter the course of an empire. In the early months of 44 BC, Rome was a city teetering on the edge of transformation, its ancient republican ideals clashing violently with the reality of one man's unassailable power. Julius Caesar, now dictator perpetuo, held the reins of an empire that stretched across continents, yet his grip on power was not as secure as it seemed. Beneath the surface of his triumphant return from civil war and his sweeping reforms, a storm of resentment and fear was brewing among Rome's elite. The Senate, once the bastion of shared governance, had become a shadow of its former self, filled with Caesar's loyalists and stripped of its ability to check his authority. To many of the old Republican Guard, this was not progress but a slow, suffocating death of the very system they had sworn to uphold. The question was no longer whether Caesar's rule would change Rome, but whether it would destroy and who, if anyone, would dare to stop him. The seeds of conflict had been sown long before Caesar's dictatorship was formalized. His crossing of the Rubicon in 49 BC, an act of open rebellion against the Senate's authority, had marked him as a man willing to shatter tradition for personal gain. While his victories in the civil war against Pompey and his allies had cemented his dominance, they also deepened the enmity of those who saw him as a usurper. The Optimates, the conservative faction of the Senate, were particularly incensed by Caesar's actions. Men like Marcus Tullius Cicero, a renowned orator and staunch defender of republican values, publicly lamented the loss of liberty under Caesar's rule, though Cicero himself was too cautious to act directly against him. Others, however, were not so restrained. The lingering bitterness of defeated enemies and the growing unease among even his supposed allies created a volatile mix, ready to ignite at the slightest provocation. What fueled this rising conflict was not merely political ideology but raw, personal grievances. Caesar's clemency, often touted as a virtue, became a double-edged sword. After the Civil War, he had pardoned many of his former enemies, including key figures like Marcus Junius Brutus and Gaius Cassius Longinus, both of whom had fought for Pompey. This act of mercy was meant to demonstrate magnanimity and secure loyalty, but for some, it bred resentment instead. Brutus, a man of high moral standing and a descendant of the legendary Lucius Junius Brutus who had expelled Rome's last king, felt the weight of his family's republican legacy. Though Caesar had shown him favor appointing him to prestigious positions and even treating him with personal affection, Brutus could not reconcile his gratitude with the reality of Caesar's autocracy. Cassius, on the other hand, harbored a more visceral disdain. A proud and ambitious general, he chafed under Caesar's dominance, believing himself diminished by a man he once considered an equal. Together, These two men would become the linchpins of a conspiracy, driven by a complex blend of principle and personal slight. The tipping point came with Caesar's increasingly monarchical behavior, which inflamed fears that he intended to crown himself king, a title anathema to Romans, who prided themselves on their rejection of monarchy since the founding of the Republic. In early 44 BC, during the festival of Lupercalia, a public spectacle unfolded that sent shockwaves through the city. As Caesar sat watching the celebrations, his close ally Mark Antony approached him and offered a diadem, a symbol of kingship, placing it on his head. The crowd's reaction was mixed. Some cheered, others murmured in discontent, and Caesar, sensing the danger, refused the crown, pushing it away with a theatrical gesture. Whether this was a genuine rejection or a staged act to gauge public sentiment remains a matter of historical debate, but to many senators, it was a chilling omen. Rumors swirled that Caesar harbored royal ambitions, perhaps intending to establish a dynasty with Cleopatra, the Egyptian queen who had borne him a son, Caesarion, and whose presence in Rome was a source of scandal and suspicion. These fears were compounded by Caesar's own actions, which seemed to confirm his desire for absolute power. He had already accepted unprecedented honors, including statues erected in his likeness, a golden throne in the Senate, and the title of divusa, divine status, typically reserved for gods or deified emperors after death. His image appeared on coins, a privilege once exclusive to deities, and he renamed a month of the year after himself July, derived from his family name, Julius. To the conspirators, each of these acts was a slap in the face to Republican tradition, a sign that Caesar saw himself not as a servant of Rome but as its master. Even his planned military campaign against Parthia, set to begin in the 4th of March 4 BC, raised alarm. Some believed he sought to return from the east with even greater glory, perhaps as a conqueror king in the mold of Alexander the Great. As discontent festered, a group of senators began to coalesce around Brutus and Cassius, forming a conspiracy that would come to be known as the Liberators. This was no small cabal. It eventually grew to include over 60 men, drawn from various factions and motivated by a mix of idealism and opportunism. Among them were Decimus Junius Brutus Albinus, a trusted general who had served under Caesar in Gaul, and Gaius Trebonius, another former ally. Their meetings were clandestine, held in private homes under the guise of casual gatherings, as they debated the necessity and morality of their plan. For Brutus, the decision was agonizing. He wrestled with his personal loyalty to Caesar, who had spared his life and shown him kindness, against his duty to Rome. Cassius, more pragmatic and embittered, argued that Caesar's death was the only way to restore the Republic, framing the act as a noble sacrifice rather than murder. Slowly, through whispered arguments and shared grievances, they forged a pact to strike at the heart of Caesar's power. The conspirators knew they had to act swiftly and decisively. Caesar's planned departure for the Parthian campaign meant their window of opportunity was closing. If he left Rome with his legions, their chance to stop him might be lost forever. They also faced the challenge of his personal security. Caesar was often surrounded by loyal bodyguards and supporters. Yet, his own hubris provided an opening. Despite warnings from soothsayers and even his wife Calpurnia, who reportedly dreamed of his death, Caesar dismissed omens and often appeared in public with minimal protection, trusting in his charisma and the fear he inspired. The conspirators chose the Senate as their stage, a symbolic location where the Republic's ideals were meant to reign supreme, and they set their plan for the Ides of March, the 15th of March, 44 BCA date, that would echo through history as a turning point of betrayal and bloodshed. As the Ides of the 4th of March 4 BC drew near, the city of Rome seemed to hold its breath, caught in an invisible web of conspiracy and foreboding. The streets buzzed with the usual clamor of merchants, senators, and citizens, yet beneath this veneer of normalcy, a deadly plot was reaching its final stages. The Liberators, the group of over 60 senators and allies, led by Marcus Junius Brutus and Gaius Cassius Longinus, had committed themselves to an act that would either save the Republic or plunge it into chaos. Their target, Julius Caesar, remained the colossus at the center of Roman power, seemingly untouchable, yet more vulnerable than he realized. Every whispered conversation, every furtive glance in the forum, carried the weight of a secret that could not be contained much longer. The stage was set, The daggers were sharpened, and the fate of an empire hung in the balance. The conspirators had chosen the 15th of March, the Ides of March, with deliberate care. It was one of the last Senate meetings before Caesar's planned departure for his military campaign against Parthia, scheduled just 3 days later on the 18th of March. If they delayed, Caesar would leave Rome surrounded by his loyal legions, making any attempt on his life far riskier, if not impossible. The Senate meeting, held in the theater of Pompeia, grand complex built by Caesar's late rival, and ironically, a place where Caesar felt secure, offered the perfect opportunity. Senators were not typically searched for weapons upon entering, as carrying small daggers or knives under their togas was not uncommon for personal protection in a city rife with political violence. The conspirators planned to use this custom to their advantage, concealing their blades beneath the folds of their garments, ready to strike when the moment was right. The plan itself was a masterpiece of coordination, though not without its flaws. Brutus and Cassius, as the de facto leaders, had assigned specific roles to key members of the conspiracy. Decimus Junius Brutus Albinus, one of Caesar's most trusted generals, was tasked with ensuring Caesar attended the Senate meeting, as there were rumors he might skip it due to personal or political concerns. Decimus, who had fought alongside Caesar in Gaul and been rewarded with high honors, was in a unique position to influence him, leveraging their close relationship to dispel any hesitation. Meanwhile, Gaius Trebonius was to distract Mark Antony, Caesar's fiercely loyal lieutenant and co-consul, by engaging him in conversation outside the Senate chamber to prevent him from intervening. The rest of the conspirators would surround Caesar under the pretense of presenting a petition, a common practice, before drawing their weapons and striking simultaneously to ensure he had no chance to escape or call for help. Yet, for all their meticulous planning, the conspirators were haunted by the fear of discovery. Rome was a city of spies and informants, and a group as large as theirs, over 60 men from various social and political backgrounds, could hardly keep such a monumental secret without risk. Whispers of unrest had already reached Caesar's inner circle, though the specifics remained elusive. Some senators who were approached to join the plot had refused, either out of loyalty to Caesar or fear of the consequences, and there was always the chance that one of them might betray the plan. Brutus, ever the idealist, insisted that their cause was just and that history would vindicate them, but even he could not ignore the gnawing doubt that their actions might be seen as mere murder rather than liberation. Cassius, more cynical, focused on the practicalities, urging the group to remain resolute and act without hesitation when the time came. On the other side, Caesar himself was not entirely blind to the dangers surrounding him, though his confidence or perhaps arrogance often overshadowed his caution. In the days leading up to the Ides, omens and warnings abounded, feeding into the superstitious undercurrent of Roman culture. A soothsayer named Spurina had famously cautioned Caesar to beware the Ides of March, a prophecy that became etched in history, though at the time Caesar reportedly dismissed it with a laugh, noting on the morning of the 15th of March that the Ides had come without incident. More personal and pressing was the concern of his wife Calpurnia, who was said to have been plagued by nightmares of her husband's death. According to historical accounts by Suetonius and Plutarch, she dreamed of Caesar's body streaming with blood and begged him not to attend the Senate meeting, her pleas rooted in a visceral fear that something terrible was imminent. Caesar, moved by her distress, initially agreed to stay home, sending word that he was unwell, but this decision would soon be challenged. The tension reached a fever pitch on the morning of the 15th of March, as the city awoke to a day that felt heavy with unspoken dread. Caesar, still at home, was visited by Decimus Brutus, who played his role with chilling precision. Decimus urged Caesar not to disappoint the Senate, arguing that his absence would be seen as weakness or disdain, especially at a time when he was preparing for a major campaign. He even mocked the idea of heeding omens and dreams, appealing to Caesar's sense of duty and pride. Reluctantly, Caesar relented, deciding to attend the meeting after all, though he did so without his usual bodyguard, the Spanish troops he often kept close, perhaps lulled into a false sense of security by the familiarity of the Senate and the presence of trusted faces like Decimus. As he made his way through the streets in his litter, accompanied by a small entourage, the city seemed to watch, as if sensing the gravity of the moment. Meanwhile, the conspirators gathered at the theater of Pompey, their nerves taut as they awaited their target. Some, like Brutus, carried the weight of moral conflict, knowing that the man they were about to kill had shown them mercy and trust. Others, like Cassius, burned with a cold determination, their resentment honed to a razor's edge. They rehearsed their plan in hushed tones, ensuring each man knew his placeum would strike the first blows, others would block the exits, and all would proclaim their act as a defense of liberty once it was done. The petition they carried, a fabricated request for the recall of an exiled senator, was merely a prop to get close to Caesar, a ruse to mask their deadly intent. As the hour approached, the Senate chamber filled with senators, both conspirators and unsuspecting bystanders, the air thick with anticipation, and the unspoken question of whether they would succeed or whether their plot would unravel at the last moment. Caesar's arrival at the theater of Pompeii marked the point of no return. As he stepped down from his litter and entered the grand portico, greeted by familiar faces and the murmur of routine business, he could not have known that he was walking into a trap centuries in the making. The conspirators, scattered among the crowd, exchanged subtle nods, their hands gripping the hilts of hidden daggers. The Republic, or what remained of it, stood on the brink of a violent rebirth or a descent into deeper chaos. The next few moments would decide not just Caesar's fate, but the future of Rome itself. The morning of the 15th of March, 44 BC, the Ides of March unfolded in Rome with a deceptive calm, the city's bustling streets and grand edifices masking the violent storm about to erupt within the walls of the theater of Pompey. Julius Caesar, the man who had conquered nations and reshaped an empire, entered the Senate chamber with the confidence of a ruler who believed himself untouchable. Clad in his purple toga, a symbol of his unparalleled authority, he took his seat on a gilded chair, surrounded by senators whose faces bore smiles of deference or hidden malice. The air was heavy with the scent of incense and the murmur of political discourse, but beneath it all pulsed a deadly intent. In mere moments, the heart of Rome would be pierced by the daggers of betrayal, and the blood of a dictator would stain the marble floor, marking the end of an era and the beginning of chaos. As Caesar settled into his place, the conspirators, over 60 in number and led by Marcus Junius Brutus and Gaius Cassius Longinus, moved with calculated precision, their nerves steeled by weeks of planning and the weight of their cause. They had positioned themselves strategically around the chamber, some near the exits to prevent interference, others close to Caesar, under the guise of routine business. Gaius Trebonius, as planned, had already engaged Mark Antony in conversation outside the hall, delaying the loyal general's entry and ensuring he could not intervene. The rest of the liberators carried a fabricated petition, a document requesting the recall of an exiled senator, which served as their pretext to approach Caesar en masse. Their daggers, hidden beneath the folds of their togas, were ready to strike, each man knowing that hesitation could mean failure and likely their own deaths. The attack began with a deceptive calm, as Lucius Tullius Cimber, one of the conspirators, stepped forward to present the petition. He approached Caesar with a feigned air of urgency, speaking in low tones as if to plead his case. Then, in a sudden rehearsed motion, Cimber grabbed Caesar's toga at the shoulder, pulling it down to expose his neck and chest to signal to the others that the moment had arrived. Caesar, startled, rebuked Cimber with a sharp word, but before he could fully react, Publius Servilius Casca, standing behind him, drew his dagger and struck the first blow, a glancing wound to Caesar's neck or shoulder. The pain and shock registered on Caesar's face as he turned, grappling with Casca, but this was only the beginning. The chamber erupted into chaos as the other conspirators surged forward, their blades flashing in the dim light, each man determined to land a strike in the name of liberty. What followed was a frenzied, brutal assault, a scene of raw violence that historical accounts by Suetonius, Plutarch, and Appian have immortalized in chilling detail. Caesar, surrounded on all sides, fought desperately to defend himself, using his stylusa, sharp writing tool as a makeshift weapon to fend off his attackers. But against so many, even a man of his strength and military prowess stood no chance. Daggers plunged into his body repeatedly, targeting his chest, back, and sides, as blood poured onto the marble floor, pooling around the base of a statue of Pompey, his old rival, as if history itself bore witness to the irony. The conspirators, driven by a mix of fear, rage, and conviction, struck with such ferocity that some accidentally wounded each other in the melee, their hands slick with blood and sweat. Caesar, staggering under the weight of his injuries, reportedly received 23 stab wounds, though only 1 or 2 would have been fatal on their own. Amid the chaos, one moment stands out in the annals of history, a poignant detail that captures the personal tragedy of this political murder. As Caesar struggled, his eyes locked onto Marcus Junius Brutus, a man he had pardoned, promoted, and treated almost as a son. According to legend, preserved by Suetonius and later dramatized by Shakespeare, Caesar uttered the words, "Et tu, Brute?" Latin for, "And you, Brutus?" A question laced with disbelief and heartbreak as Brutus delivered a blow to his groin, one of the most personal and humiliating strikes. Whether Caesar truly spoke these words is debated by historians, as Plutarch records no such utterance, suggesting instead that Caesar pulled his toga over his head in a final act of dignity as he fell. Regardless, the sentiment of betrayal was real. Brutus, torn between loyalty and principle, had chosen the Republic over the man who had shown him mercy, a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. As Caesar collapsed, his lifeblood draining onto the cold stone, the conspirators stepped back, their task complete but their triumph uncertain. The Senate chamber, moments ago a place of debate and decorum, was now a scene of carnage, with senators fleeing in panic or standing frozen in horror. Some of the conspirators, as planned, raised their bloodied daggers and shouted cries of "Liberty" and "The Republic is restored," hoping to rally support among their peers. But the reaction was not what they had envisioned. There was no immediate surge of approval, only confusion and fear. Mark Antony, hearing the commotion, managed to escape before he could be targeted, retreating to safety to plot his next move. The body of Julius Caesar lay at the foot of Pompey's statue, a stark symbol of power brought low, his once invincible presence reduced to a lifeless shell, his purple toga soaked crimson. The immediate aftermath of the assassination was a void of stunned silence, followed by pandemonium. The conspirators, realizing the gravity of their act and the lack of unified support, quickly exited the theater of Pompeii, moving to the Capitoline Hill to fortify their position and proclaim their intentions to the Roman people. They believed they had struck a blow for freedom, ending the tyranny of a would-be king, but they had underestimated the loyalty Caesar commanded among the masses and his allies. The city, already a tinderbox of political tension, stood on the brink of eruption as news of the murder spread like wildfire through the Forum and beyond. The man who had been both savior and dictator to Rome was gone, but his death was not the end. It was the spark that would ignite a new and even bloodier chapter in the struggle for power. The Ides of the 4th of March 4 BC had passed, but the blood of Julius Caesar still stained the marble floor of the theater of Pompeii, a grim testament to the violence that had shattered Rome's fragile stability. As the conspirators, self-styled as the liberators, fled the scene of their crime, a wave of shock and uncertainty swept through the city. The man who had been both dictator and savior, a colossus straddling the line between tyranny and reform, was dead struck down by the very senators he had trusted. Yet, far from restoring the Republic as they had hoped, the assassins, led by Marcus Junius Brutus and Gaius Cassius Longinus, had unleashed a Pandora's box of chaos, grief, and vengeance. Rome, already a city of simmering tensions, now stood on the precipice of civil war, as the power vacuum left by Caesar's death invited ambition and retribution to fill the void. In the immediate hours following the assassination, the conspirators sought to justify their actions and rally support. Retreating to the Capitoline Hill, a defensible position overlooking the Forum, they barricaded themselves with gladiators for protection and began to address the Roman people. Brutus, ever the idealist, delivered a speech emphasizing their noble intent to save the Republic from a would-be king and restore the ancient liberties of Rome. Waving their bloodied daggers, they proclaimed that they had acted not out of personal enmity, but for the greater good, hoping to sway the masses and the remaining senators to their cause. However, the response was far from unanimous. While some, particularly among the old Republican elite, quietly approved of the deed, many in the crowd were ambivalent or openly hostile. Caesar, despite his autocratic rule, had been a champion of the common people, enacting reforms like land distribution and debt relief that endeared him to the masses. His death was not seen as liberation by all, but as a betrayal of a leader who had brought stability and glory to Rome. Meanwhile, Caesar's allies, though initially stunned, moved swiftly to seize control of the narrative in the city. Mark Antony, who had narrowly escaped the conspirators' reach by being detained outside the Senate chamber, emerged as a central figure in the power struggle that followed. A seasoned general and Caesar's co-consul, Antony was both a skilled politician and a fierce loyalist. He retreated to safety, securing his position with loyal troops, and began to plan his next move. At the same time, Caesar's body, left abandoned in the theater of Pompey for hours, was eventually retrieved by a small group of loyalists and taken to his home on the Palatine Hill. His wife, Calpurnia, and his inner circle mourned privately, but the public display of grief would soon become a weapon in the hands of those seeking to avenge him. The turning point came during Caesar's funeral, held a few days later in the Forum, an event orchestrated by Mark Antony to inflame public sentiment against the conspirators. According to historical accounts by Appian and Suetonius, Antony delivered a masterful oration, one that transformed grief into rage. Standing before a massive crowd, he displayed Caesar's bloodied toga, pointing to each tear and stain as evidence of the brutal betrayal by men Caesar had trusted. He read aloud Caesar's will, which revealed generous bequests to the Roman people, 75 drachmas to every citizen, and the donation of his gardens as public parks, further cementing Caesar's image as a benevolent leader. Most shockingly, the will named Gaius Octavius, Caesar's 18-year-old great-nephew, as his adopted son and primary heir, a revelation that would soon alter the course of Roman history. The crowd, whipped into a frenzy by Antony's words, erupted in anger, some even attempting to cremate Caesar's body on the spot with makeshift pyres. The conspirators, watching from a distance, realized their grave miscalculation. Far from being hailed as liberators, they were now targets of public wrath. Politically, the aftermath was a delicate and dangerous dance. Antony, leveraging his position as consul, initially sought a compromise to avoid immediate bloodshed. He negotiated with the Senate, which, under pressure and fear of further violence, granted amnesty to the conspirators while also affirming Caesar's acts and reforms to placate his supporters. Brutus and Cassius, though temporarily safe, were forced to leave Rome for their own protection, taking up governorships in distant provinces, Brutus in Crete and Cassius in Syria, where they began to amass troops and resources. At the same time, Antony consolidated power in Rome, positioning himself as the de facto leader of Caesar's faction, though he underestimated the rising influence of Octavian, Caesar's young heir, who arrived in the city to claim his inheritance and quickly proved himself a shrewd political operator. The fragile peace could not hold. By late 44 BC, tensions between Antony, Octavian, and the conspirators escalated into open conflict. Cicero, the veteran orator and Republican, delivered a series of scathing speeches known as the Philippics against Antony, accusing him of tyranny and urging the Senate to support Octavian and the assassins. This further polarized the factions, and by 43 BC, Antony, Octavian, and Marcus Aemilius Lepidus, another of Caesar's loyal generals, formed the Second Triumvirate, a legal alliance to share power and crush their enemies. Their first act was a brutal proscription, a purge of political opponents that saw thousands, including Cicero, hunted down and killed, their properties confiscated to fund the coming war. Brutus and Cassius, now commanding significant armies in the east, prepared to face the triumvirate, setting the stage for the Battle of Philippi in 42 BC, where they would meet their ultimate defeat. Both men, facing capture, took their own lives, their dream of a restored republic dying with them. The assassination of Julius Caesar, intended as a surgical strike to save Rome from dictatorship, instead accelerated its collapse. The Republic, already weakened by decades of civil strife and inequality, could not withstand the power struggles that followed. Octavian, emerging as the victor after years of conflict, would eventually become Augustus, Rome's first emperor, ushering in the imperial era and fulfilling the very fears of monarchy that had driven the conspirators to act. Caesar's death, rather than preserving liberty, marked the death knell of the Republic, replacing it with a system of autocratic rule that would define Rome for centuries. The Ides of March became a cautionary tale, a reminder of the unintended consequences of political violence and the fragility of power in a city built on ambition and betrayal. The assassination of Julius Caesar on the Ides of the 4th of March 4 BC was more than the murder of a man. It was the violent punctuation mark at the end of the Roman Republic, a system that had governed one of history's greatest civilizations for nearly 5 centuries. The daggers that pierced Caesar's body in the theater of Pompeii did not just spill his blood, they tore through the fragile fabric of a political order already fraying under the weight of ambition, inequality, and endless conflict. In the years that followed, Rome transformed irrevocably, morphing from a republic of shared governance into an empire ruled by emperors, beginning with Caesar's own heir, Octavian, who would take the title Augustus. The conspirators, who had dreamed of restoring liberty, instead became footnotes in a story of unintended consequences, their act of betrayal setting the stage for centuries of autocratic rule. As the dust settled on the civil wars that followed Caesar's death, the question lingered. Was his assassination a noble sacrifice for freedom, or a catastrophic misstep that doomed Rome to tyranny? Caesar's legacy is a paradox, a blend of brilliance and controversy that continues to captivate historians and storytellers alike. On one hand, he was a visionary leader whose military conquests, like the subjugation of Gaul, expanded Rome's borders and brought immense wealth and cultural exchange to the empire. His reforms restructuring the calendar into the Julian system we still use as a basis today, expanding citizenship and redistributing land to veterans, and the poor addressed systemic issues that had plagued the Republic for decades. He was a populist in an era of entrenched elitism, a man who understood the power of the masses and wielded it to challenge the Senate's dominance. Yet, on the other hand, his consolidation of power as dictator perpetuo and his flirtations with divine and monarchical honors alienated many who saw him as a threat to the very ideals Rome was founded upon. To the conspirators like Brutus and Cassius, Caesar was not a savior but a destroyer, a man whose ambition threatened to erase the Republic's core identity. History has never fully settled the debate over whether he was a tyrant or a reformer, and perhaps it never will. His story remains a mirror reflecting the viewer's own beliefs about power and governance. The immediate legacy of Caesar's death was one of chaos and transformation. The civil wars that erupted between the Second Triumvirate Mark Antony, Octavian, and Lepidusand, the conspirators, culminated in the Battle of Philippi in 42 BC, where Brutus and Cassius were defeated and took their own lives. Their vision of a restored republic shattered. Octavian's eventual rise to power as Augustus in 27 BC marked the birth of the Roman Empire, a system that centralized authority in a single ruler, ironically fulfilling the fears of monarchy that had driven the assassination. Under Augustus, Rome entered a period of relative peace known as the Pax Romana, but it came at the cost of the republican freedoms the liberators had fought to preserve. The Senate became a ceremonial body, its power diminished, while emperors ruled with the divine authority Caesar had once been accused of seeking. In a bitter twist, Caesar's name itself became synonymous with imperial power. Future Roman rulers took the title Caesar, and it echoed through history in forms like Kaiser in Germany and Tsar in Russia, a testament to the enduring weight of his influence. Beyond politics, Caesar's assassination left an indelible mark on culture and memory. The Ides of March became a byword for betrayal and foreboding, immortalized in literature and art across centuries. Ancient historians like Suetonius and Plutarch chronicled the event with dramatic flair, preserving details like the soothsayer's warning and the poignant, if possibly apocryphal, cry of "Et tu, Brute." Their accounts shaped how later generations perceived the story, often casting Brutus as a tragic figure torn between loyalty and duty. By the time William Shakespeare penned Julius Caesar in 1599, the assassination had become a moral and philosophical drama, a meditation on the ethics of political violence and the clash between individual ambition and collective good. Shakespeare's play, with its iconic lines and complex characterizations, ensured that Caesar's death remained a touchstone for exploring themes of power, betrayal, and destiny, resonating with audiences even in the modern era. Today, the phrase "crossing the Rubicon" symbolizes an irreversible decision, while "Beware the Ides of March" evokes a sense of ominous warning, proof of how deeply Caesar's story is woven into our cultural fabric. Yet, for all its mythic resonance, the assassination also serves as a stark reminder of the fragility of political systems and the unintended consequences of radical action. The conspirators believed they were saving Rome, but their act plunged it into further strife, proving that violence, even when cloaked in noble intent, often begets more violence. The republic they sought to preserve was already dying, weakened by internal corruption and external pressures, and Caesar's death merely hastened its demise. Historians debate whether the republic could have been saved at all by 44 BC, or if Caesar's rise was an inevitable response to systemic failures. What is clear, however, is that his assassination did not achieve the conspirators' goals. It neither restored liberty nor prevented autocracy. Instead, it paved the way for a new form of governance, one that would shape the Western world for centuries, for better or worse. As we reflect on Julius Caesar's life and death, a lingering question emerges. At what cost do we pursue ideals like freedom or justice? And how do we weigh the morality of actions taken in their name? The Ides of March stands as a cautionary tale, a moment when personal grievances and political principles collided with catastrophic results, altering the trajectory of an empire. Caesar's story challenges us to consider the fine line between hero and villain, between necessary change and destructive ambition. His blood on the Senate floor was not just the end of a man, but a symbol of the end of an era and the birth of something new, something neither he nor his killers could have fully foreseen. For those watching or listening to this tale, I invite you to share your thoughts. Was Caesar's assassination a tragic necessity or a grave mistake? How do you see the echoes of his story in the power struggles of our own time? Let's continue this conversation in the comments as we ponder the lessons of history that remain as relevant now as they were over 2 millennia ago.